Speech behind closed doors. There have always been two Harpers. The real Harper always comes out when he thinks he can't be heard. And this Harper was contemptuous of other political parties. He treats every adversary as a public enemy who has to be destroyed. And so you wonder why it's difficult for me to continue to support him. That's what it's like in private. Secondly, he asked for a majority. He demanded a majority. You know, I've been a lot of places this country this summer, and I haven't met a Canadian who thinks he deserves a majority. Talk to the unemployed in Oshawa, talk to the unemployed in the forestry sector in British Columbia or dans la Gaspésie, where I was this summer many times. You ask those working men and women whether this guy deserves a majority, they'll laugh in your face. And the third point that needs to be said has to do with his basic values. And this is what's so disappointing. He qualifies women who work to help abused and vulnerable Canadians, he calls them left-wing ideologues. I call them people trying to be good citizens. He attacks the independence of the judiciary. The independence of the judiciary is the basis of Canadian freedom. If you don't respect that, you don't respect Canadians' freedom. And finally, on the firearms registry, I've been across the country. I have never met a police chief who doesn't believe that the firearms registry is necessary to the safety of those officers who keep us safe and necessary for the safety of the public. And so this speech tells you what this situation is all about. It's impossible to work with a man who treats you as an enemy. It's impossible to work with a man who doesn't have respect for basic Canadian values and basic Canadian institutions. And it heightens my resolve to give Canadians compassionate, centrist, common sense government based on the values that a majority of Canadians believe in. Look at the language there. Look at the language. I have opposed the Bloc in Parliament, always will. But I don't dismiss them and treat them as enemies. I don't treat them as separatists. Not everybody who votes for the Bloc is a separatist. These are democratically elected fellow citizens. They're adversaries, but they're not my enemies. And I don't think there's been a socialist in the NDP in 30 years. So, I mean, let's all relax here. It's this kind of hyper-partisan description of every adversary as an enemy that makes it very difficult to make Parliament work. He's lost the confidence of Parliament once with these tricks last November and December. Never forget that the responsibility for making Parliament work lies in the hand of the Prime Minister of Canada in a minority Parliament. And he's not discharging his responsibility. I think the country is drifting. I think this government has no plans to create the jobs of tomorrow. Everywhere I go, people in business, people in the universities, people in the scientific community are looking for a partner who's saying, we're not just going through a recession, we're going through a fundamental restructuring of our economy. Who is going to create the jobs of tomorrow for our kids and our grandchildren? And this is the test that Mr. Harper is failing. I rejoice when there's any sign of recovery. I genuinely do. But who gets the credit here? The people who get the credit are the Canadians who rolled up their sleeves and put the shoulder to the wheel. I don't think that the government of Canada can claim any credit for this recovery. I think the recovery that has happened is because Canadians have worked darn hard. And I want to work with them to get us ready for the economy of tomorrow. Well, you're looking at the guy who turned down the last coalition because I didn't feel it was in the national interest. So I don't think I need to answer that question. I've made my position about coalition very clear. If were we to have an election, I'm seeking a Liberal government. I think I've made it very clear by my behavior last January in relation to coalition politics. I've made it clear. I didn't think it was in the national interest. I could be standing here as Prime Minister of Canada, but I turned it down. I think I made that. I don't need to revisit that. I don't need to revisit in the future. But what I've made very clear is that I am seeking, were there to be an election, we still don't know whether there will be one, but were there to be an election, I'm going to campaign across the country for a moderate, compassionate, progressive, and competent liberal government, period. Mr. Flaherty has a credibility problem. The government has a credibility problem. Just run the tape back to the start. There'll be no recession. There'll be no deficit. Oops, there'll be a deficit of 32 billion. Oops, there'll be a deficit of 50 billion. And now he's saying we'll get back to balance by 2015. If pigs can fly. I said in Sudbury, this really is a question of principle for me. The speech, the backroom speech given by Mr. Harper, I think shows the country why this is a question of principle. We just don't share the same values. I've kept this government on life support for 10.5 months because I believed when we were in the pit of that economic crisis in the spring that I had to put partisanship aside and try, you know, some stimulus was better than no stimulus, some help to the unemployed was better than none. Okay, I think I've done my bit to make Parliament work. And this Prime Minister, you know, constantly operates Parliament my way or the highway. And at a certain point, you can't sustain Parliament on that basis. So I feel very strongly that I've taken a position of principle. I think I feel very strongly that as Canadians listen to a positive, a moderate, a centrist, a compassionate, and a competent alternative for Canada, they're going to come to us.